My name is Olivia, 34 years old, and a senior risk data analyst. After my husband's affair wiped out my life savings, the husband of his mistress tracked me down. He tossed a heavy leather dossier onto my patio table and stared at me. "I have $700 million, he said, his voice void of emotion. "Just say yes, and tomorrow we sign the marriage papers at the courthouse." Before I tell you how this proposition led to the financial ruin of my cheating ex and his toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever smiled while watching enemies walk blindly into a trap. The nightmare began 48 hours before that surreal encounter. It was a Tuesday morning, and the world outside my window was washed in the soft light of early spring. I sat at my kitchen island, a fresh cup of coffee, warming my hands, fully prepared to execute a major financial move. As a risk analyst, my entire life revolves around calculating variables and making secure decisions. Month after month, I funneled my bonuses into a high-yield joint savings account. I had finally reached my target of $150,000. Today was the day I planned to initiate a stock buyout. I opened my laptop, typed in my credentials, and waited for the dashboard to load. I knew exactly what the numbers should look like. But when the screen refreshed, I simply stared. The numbers did not make sense. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, convinced there was a glitch in the banking software. The balance read exactly $0. No pending transactions, no holds, just zero. A cold, heavy sensation began to spread from my chest down to my stomach. As an analyst, panic is my enemy. I forced myself to breathe and navigated immediately to the transaction history. There it was, a single outbound wire transfer for $150,000 executed late the previous night. My eyes scanned the screen to find the authorization details. The transfer had been initiated and approved by my husband, Ryan. Ryan was a 35-year-old sales director. We had been married for 6 years, and while our marriage had grown distant lately, I never calculated that he would steal my savings. I picked up my phone, assuming identity theft. But before I could dial, the front door unlocked and swung open. Ryan walked into the foyer, dressed in his expensive tailored suit, holding a cup of artisan coffee. He looked completely unbothered, humming a soft tune under his breath. I spun my laptop around so the screen faced him. "Ryan, what is this?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why is the account empty?" He stopped, took a slow sip of his coffee, and looked at the screen. He did not flinch. He did not look guilty or surprised. In fact, a small, arrogant smirk played at the corner of his mouth. "Oh, good you saw it," he said casually, stepping into the kitchen and setting his keys on the counter. "I meant to tell you before I left. I moved the funds. Moved the funds where I demanded, standing up from my stool. You cannot just wire $150,000 out of our account without discussing it with me. I earned almost all of that money, Ryan." He sighed, looking at me as if I were a child. "I secured a safe investment, Olivia. A safe investment. The money is in an account under Lauren's name." The name hit me like a physical blow. Lauren. She was his 29-year-old former assistant. I had met her at several company holiday parties. She always laughed a little too loudly at his jokes and lingered just a little too long when handing him a drink. "Lauren," I repeated, the reality of the situation rapidly crashing down on me. "You transferred my life savings to your former assistant." Ryan crossed his arms and leaned against the granite countertop, radiating an infuriating level of confidence. "Yes, Lauren," he replied smoothly. "And let us be completely honest here, Olivia. We have been running on fumes for over a year. I am filing for divorce today. I already spoke with my lawyer." I stood frozen in my own kitchen. My husband had been having an affair with his younger assistant, drained my hard-earned savings to fund her life, and was now casually announcing our divorce over his morning coffee. But Ryan was not finished. He stepped closer, his expression hardening into something cold and cruel. "Since we are ripping the Band-Aid off," he continued, "I am going to need you to pack your things. You have exactly 48 hours to vacate this house." I stared at him in sheer disbelief. Vacate the house? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I paid for 70% of the down payment on this property, Ryan. You cannot just kick me out of my own home. He let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, but I can, he said. You see, while you were busy buried in your spreadsheets and data models, I was making actual moves in the real world. Lauren and I need this space. He grabbed his briefcase from the hall chair and paused by the front door, looking back at me with a gaze full of absolute disdain. He delivered his final blow with a practiced, arrogant delivery. You calculate risk for a living, Olivia. But you could not calculate your own husband getting bored of your spreadsheets. Have a nice life figuring out your new budget. With that, he walked out and closed the door behind him, leaving me completely alone in a house I was about to lose, with absolutely no money to my name. I did not scream. I just stood there and started calculating my next major financial move. I stood there in the silence of the foyer, my mind organizing the chaos into data points. The front door handle clicked loudly. Ryan pushed the door open and stepped back inside. He had forgotten his gym bag on the bench. He picked it up, but instead of leaving, he lingered. His ego demanded an audience for his victory. You are wondering why I did it, he said, a smug tone coating his words. Why I chose Lauren over a woman who makes a six-figure salary. I kept my face blank. I was not wondering anything, Ryan, I replied. I was calculating how long you will last in federal court. He scoffed. Always the cold calculating machine. That is exactly why this marriage failed. You want to know the real reason I am leaving. Lauren is pregnant with my son. The words hung in the air. He wanted me to shatter right there on the floor. She knows how to be a real woman, he continued, leaning against the doorframe. She makes me feel like a husband. While you were climbing the corporate ladder and bringing your laptop to bed, she was paying attention to my needs. A man wants a family. Olivia, not a business partner, married to a risk assessment matrix. I absorbed his cruelty without flinching. My analytical mind processed his words, extracting the relevant facts. He had an affair, he was expecting a child, and he felt justified. Congratulations on your growing family, I said, my voice sterile. But your domestic bliss does not change the facts. I am not vacating this house. I paid for 70% of the down payment and my name is on the deed. You can rent an apartment, but I am staying here. Ryan laughed. Oh, Olivia. He chuckled. You really think I would walk in here and drop a bomb without securing my assets first? You are not the only one who knows how to plan ahead. He pulled out a folded paper, tossing it onto the console table. Review your mail carefully, he said. The house is no longer a split asset. It is legally tied up in a new mortgage structure. I refinanced the property. I frowned, my eyes darting to the paper. You cannot refinance a house with both our names on the deed without my signature, I stated firmly. The bank requires a notary. Ryan smiled a predatory grin. Exactly, he said smoothly. Which is why you signed the loan agreements last Thursday. I have the fully executed copies in my office. The bank approved the disbursement yesterday. The air in the room felt incredibly thin. Last Thursday I was in Chicago attending a risk management conference. I had physical plane tickets and hotel receipts proving my location. I did not sign any documents, I said slowly, the reality of the situation clicking into place. You signed them, he insisted, his voice dripping with condescension. My buddy David from the country club was the notary. It is a legally binding contract. The house is completely leveraged and I have sole right of possession. You have 48 hours to pack your bags before I call the authorities for trespassing. My analytical mind suddenly roared into overdrive. Ryan had not just drained our joint savings account. He had committed severe federally prosecutable crimes. He had forged my signature on official bank documents. He had conspired with a notary. He had committed wire fraud to move the extracted equity into a separate account. In that moment, panic and rage threatened to crash over me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab a heavy object and smash his arrogant face. But the worst thing you can do during a hostile takeover is show the enemy you are bleeding. I inhaled deeply, forcing the panic down into a tight, dark box in my mind. I needed data, not drama. I needed evidence, not emotions. I looked at Ryan, studying the confident posture of a man who firmly believed he had just outsmarted an expert. Narcissists always fail to cover their tracks. I see, I said, my tone remaining flat. Well, if the documents are signed, then I suppose there is nothing left to debate. Ryan looked slightly disappointed. He clearly wanted a fight. He wanted me crying on the floor, begging him to stay. My lack of reaction was ruining his grand finale. Just have your boxes packed by Thursday, he muttered, shifting his gym bag. My family is coming over this afternoon to start moving some of Lauren's things in. I expect you to stay out of their way. I will be sure to stay out of the way, I replied. Ryan gave me a look of disdain and walked out the door. The heavy oak slammed shut behind him. I stood alone in the foyer. I walked to the console table and picked up the paper he left behind. It was a summary of the new loan terms. $500,000 of equity had been pulled from my home. I walked into my office, sat at my desk, and opened a fresh, secure folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named the file Federal Fraud Evidence. My husband thought he had buried me under debt and betrayal. He thought I was just a boring woman with a spreadsheet, but he had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my work. I do not just evaluate risk, I dismantle it. Ryan had just become the absolute biggest liability of my life. I started typing, mapping the digital footprint of his financial crimes, preparing to obliterate his existence. Every lie he told, every document he forged, and every dollar he stole would be weaponized against him. I was going to strip away his arrogant smile, stolen wealth, and entire future. I would not shed a single tear for my dead marriage. I would build the perfect trap, lock the door, and watch him burn. I was still staring at the glowing screen of my laptop when the heavy thud of the front door opening echoed through the hallway. It had not even been 3 hours since Ryan left. I heard the sharp click of high heels striking the hardwood floor, accompanied by the rustling of cardboard. I closed my encrypted folder, stood up, and walked out of my office. In the center of my living room stood my mother-in-law, Patricia. She was flanked by my father-in-law, Richard, and my sister-in-law, Natalie. They were carrying stacks of flattened moving boxes and rolls of packing tape. Patricia wore a designer trench coat and her signature expression of polite disdain. Richard looked around the room as if assessing a newly acquired real estate property. Natalie immediately dropped her boxes on my custom linen sofa and began unrolling the tape with a loud, grating screech. They had not knocked. Ryan had simply given them his key, granting them full access to orchestrate my removal. It was a coordinated ambush designed to overwhelm me into submission. "What are you doing?" I asked, stepping into the living room. My voice was steady, perfectly modulated to reveal nothing. Patricia turned to face me. She let out a long, dramatic sigh, the kind she usually reserved for delayed flights or slow service at her country club. "We are helping you pack, Olivia," she announced, as if she were performing an act of profound charity. "Ryan told us you are vacating the premises. We want to make this transition as swift and clean as possible for everyone involved, especially for Lauren. The poor girl is dealing with enough stress right now." I watched Richard walk over to my built-in bookshelves. He began pulling down my framed photographs and tossing them carelessly into an open box. "Ryan already explained the situation to us," Richard added without looking at me. "It is a shame it had to end this way, but you have to understand our position. A man needs to secure his legacy." Natalie chimed in from the sofa, busy constructing a box. "Honestly, Olivia, you should have seen this coming. You were never home. You cared more about your corporate promotions than giving my brother a family. Lauren actually adores him. She is already picking out nursery colors for the spare room upstairs." I stood completely still. The sheer audacity of their invasion was staggering. They had walked into the home I purchased, the sanctuary I had paid for with years of long hours and extreme financial discipline, and they were attempting to physically erase my existence to make room for my husband's pregnant mistress. They expected me to break down. They wanted me to scream, to cry, to beg them to intercede with Ryan. They were feeding on the drama, eager to brand me as the hysterical, bitter ex-wife who could not handle the truth. I gave them absolutely nothing. I folded my arms and let my gaze rest on Patricia. You are openly supporting your son stealing my life savings to fund his affair, I stated, keeping my tone strictly factual. You are helping him enforce a fraudulent mortgage. Patricia stepped closer, her chin-raised eyes flashing with arrogant justification. She felt completely untouchable. She believed Ryan's forged documents and emptied bank accounts were a brilliant tactical maneuver rather than a stack of federal felonies. Lauren is giving us an heir, Olivia, Patricia said, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous register. Consider that $150,000 your severance package for wasting my son's youth. Those exact words hung in the air, dripping with entitlement and malice. A severance package for wasting his youth. I looked at the three of them. I did not see family. I did not see people I had shared holidays and birthdays with for the past 6 years. I saw a group of accomplices. I saw targets. My silent stare clearly unsettled Natalie. She stopped taping the box and looked at her mother. "Why is she just standing there looking at us like that?" Natalie muttered, shifting uncomfortably under my gaze. "Because she knows she has lost," Patricia replied smoothly, turning her back on me to inspect a crystal vase on the mantel. "She is a smart girl. She knows when the game is over. Grab those books from the corner, Richard. We need this living room cleared by tomorrow morning so the decorators can come in." I absorbed their cruelty, letting it wash over me without penetrating my defenses. My mind automatically began categorizing their words, tagging their actions as future ammunition. Patricia's verbal confirmation that she knew about the $150,000 meant she was officially an accessory after the fact. Richard physically clearing my assets while acknowledging Ryan's maneuvers tied him directly to the execution of the fraud. Natalie's eagerness to prepare the nursery made her complicit in the hostile takeover of a property leveraged through wire fraud. They were digging their own graves right in front of me, entirely blinded by their arrogance. Every box they packed, every insult they threw at me, was just more rope they were handing me to hang them with. They thought I was paralyzed by shock and heartbreak. They had no idea I was simply observing my subjects gathering qualitative data to supplement the quantitative financial destruction I was already preparing. "You can pack whatever you like," I said quietly. "I will not stop you." Patricia smiled, a cold, victorious expression. "See, Richard," she said over her shoulder. "I told you she would eventually listen to reason. There is no point in fighting the inevitable. Just take your personal items and find a nice, quiet apartment, Olivia. It is the dignified thing to do." I turned away from them and walked slowly toward the kitchen. Let them pack the books. Let them box up the crystal vases and the framed photographs. I had already secured the only things in this house that mattered: the digital records, the financial statements, and the forged loan documents. As I entered the kitchen, the sounds of their harsh laughter and tearing packing tape echoed down the hallway. They were celebrating their hostile takeover. They were toasting to Lauren, to the new heir, to the brilliant financial moves of their golden boy Ryan. They felt utterly invincible. I poured myself a glass of cold water and leaned against the granite island, my heart beating in a slow, controlled rhythm. I did not feel defeated. I felt dangerous. The in-laws had officially crossed the line from toxic relatives to criminal conspirators. They had chosen to ride in Ryan's sinking ship, which meant they would all go down together. When I finally ripped the hull open, I just needed to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I remained silent, watching the hallway, quietly preparing for the next phase of the battle. Jamal was Natalie's husband. At 34, he was a highly successful independent auditor, a man whose entire career was built on identifying discrepancies and uncovering financial truths. He was a sharp, observant African-American man who always seemed slightly out of place amidst the chaotic arrogance of my husband's family. While the rest of them thrived on loud declarations and toxic posturing, Jamal operated in calculated silence. I had always respected his intellect, though we rarely spoke beyond polite family dinner conversation. He stepped into the kitchen, his posture tense, his eyes darting quickly back toward the living room to ensure no one was watching us. He moved to the refrigerator and pulled a glass from the cabinet, turning on the faucet under the guise of fetching water. The running water provided a perfect acoustic shield against the noise from the other room. I watched him closely. His jaw was set, and his hands moved with a deliberate, nervous energy that immediately put my risk analyst instincts on high alert. He did not look at me directly at first. He stood beside me at the granite island, bringing the glass to his lips. "Keep looking straight ahead, Olivia," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sound of the running faucet. "Do not react. Just listen to me." My heart beat a fraction faster, but my face remained perfectly composed. I fixed my gaze on the stainless steel refrigerator, maintaining the illusion of a defeated woman lost in her own misery. I gave him a microscopic nod to signal I was ready. Jamal shifted his weight, closing the small distance between us. With a swift, practiced motion that betrayed his usual professional calm, he reached out. I felt a small folded piece of paper slide smoothly into the deep pocket of my slacks. His hand retreated instantly, gripping his water glass once again. "They didn't just take your savings," Jamal whispered, his tone urgent and razor-sharp. "Ryan forged your signature to pull a $500,000 line of credit. Call this number. Harrison is looking for you." The words hit my brain like a sequence of targeted strikes. The initial shock of the $150,000 had been devastating, but a $500,000 line of credit elevated this situation from a brutal divorce tactic to a massive federal crime. Ryan had leveraged $500,000 using my stolen identity. And Harrison? The name echoed in my mind. Harrison was Lauren's husband, the husband of the Mistress. If Jamal, an independent auditor, had uncovered this paper trail and was connecting me to Harrison, the web of deception was infinitely deeper than I had calculated. Jamal turned the faucet off. He set the glass down on the counter with a quiet clink. He finally turned his head to look at me, his dark eyes conveying a mixture of profound sympathy and fierce urgency. "I saw the initial paperwork an hour ago when Ryan was bragging to Richard in the study," Jamal continued, keeping his voice incredibly low. "As an auditor, I know what a fraudulent loan application looks like. Ryan thinks he is untouchable because Richard co-signed it. They are burying you in debt to fund his new life. But Harrison knows. Harrison found the trail on Lauren's end. Call him the second you are out of this house. He has a plan." I took a slow, steady breath. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a clear, undeniable picture of federal wire fraud and systemic financial abuse. My in-laws were not just petty, cruel people. They were active participants in a massive financial crime. Richard had co-signed a fraudulent loan. Patricia was cheering it on. Ryan was the architect. And Jamal, the only person with a shred of ethical integrity in this entire family, had just handed me the key to their absolute destruction. "Thank you, Jamal," I whispered back, my voice steady and cold. "You should get back in there before they notice you are missing." Jamal gave me one last meaningful look. "Take them down, Olivia," he said softly. Then he turned and walked casually back into the living room, rejoining the circus of my in-laws as if nothing had happened. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the crisp, folded bank slip. The paper felt heavy with potential. It was not just a phone number, it was a loaded weapon. My analytical mind, previously focused on mere survival, now shifted completely into an offensive strategy. Ryan wanted me out of the house. He wanted me to leave my territory so he could claim his false victory. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted. Fighting them right now in the middle of my living room would serve no tactical purpose. It would only give Patricia the satisfaction of seeing me lose my temper. It would give Richard the opportunity to boast about his legal maneuvers. It would allow Natalie to gloat. If I stayed and screamed, I would be playing by their rules. I needed to walk away to prepare for a war they could not possibly comprehend. I stepped out of the kitchen and walked into the living room. Patricia, Richard, and Natalie stopped their packing, looking at me with eager anticipation. They were waiting for the breakdown. They were waiting for me to fall to my knees and beg for my home back. I looked at the boxes piled on my custom sofa. I looked at the empty spaces on my bookshelves. I let my shoulders slump just a fraction, perfectly mimicking the posture of a woman who had finally accepted her total defeat. "You can have the house," I said, my voice projecting a hollow, broken tone. I am leaving. Patricia smiled, a triumphant, gleaming expression. I knew you would see reason, Olivia. It is for the best. Ryan will be so relieved. I did not respond. I walked past them, my face a mask of tragedy, while inside my pulse raced with cold, calculated adrenaline. I grabbed my coat and my purse from the entryway. I did not look back as I opened the heavy front door and stepped out into the crisp spring air. I left my keys on the console table, a silent surrender of the battleground. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out the folded paper Jamal had given me. It was a bank routing slip, and scribbled on the back was a phone number and a single name: Harrison. They thought I was walking away empty-handed. They thought I was a discarded wife retreating to lick my wounds in a cheap apartment. They had absolutely no idea that I was not retreating. I was mobilizing. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number on the back of the slip. The line rang twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "This is Harrison," the voice said. "This is Olivia." I replied, my tone shedding the defeated wife persona and adopting the sharp precision of a senior risk analyst. "I believe we have a mutual problem to dismantle." "I know exactly who you are, Olivia," Harrison replied, his voice a low, steady rumble over the line. "I have a private car waiting for you at the corner of your street. Get in. We are meeting at the Obsidian in 20 minutes. Eee. The line went dead. I pocketed my phone, adjusted my coat, and walked down the suburban sidewalk, leaving my stolen house behind. True to his word, a sleek black town car was idling at the corner. I climbed into the back seat, and the driver immediately pulled away, navigating us toward the financial district. The Obsidian was the kind of high-end private club that did not advertise. It existed behind a heavy, unmarked brass door on a quiet downtown street, catering exclusively to the absolute elite of the corporate world. There were no windows, no loud music, and a strict ban on all photography. When my driver pulled up to the curb, a silent valet immediately opened my door and escorted me inside. I was led down a dimly lit mahogany-paneled hallway into a secluded private viewing room at the very back of the establishment. Harrison was waiting for me. He was sitting at a heavy leather booth, a crystal decanter of scotch resting on the polished table between us. At 40 years old, he possessed a commanding, sharp-edged presence. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that lacked any flashy designer logos, but clearly cost a fortune. He did not look like a man whose wife had just left him. He did not have the hollow, desperate eyes of a betrayed spouse seeking a shoulder to cry on. He looked entirely calm. He looked lethal. He poured a second glass of scotch and pushed it across the table toward me. "Take a seat, Olivia," he said, his voice a precise, controlled hum. "We have a significant amount of data to review." I sat down, ignoring the glass. "Jamal gave me your number," I stated, keeping my tone strictly professional. "He told me Ryan forged my signature to pull a $500,000 line of credit on our house." Harrison offered a short, humorless laugh. "Your brother-in-law is a highly observant auditor, but that $500,000 is just pocket change. That is their domestic nesting fund. The real crime is significantly larger." Harrison reached beside him and tossed a thick, unmarked black folder onto the table. "Open it." I opened the cover. As a senior risk data analyst, I process complex financial models every single day. It took me less than 30 seconds to recognize exactly what I was looking at. The pages were filled with offshore routing numbers, encrypted ledger transfers, and dummy vendor invoices. The illicit flow of capital was meticulously tracked and highlighted. Lauren and Ryan embezzled $2 million. Harrison stated, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. They used her old security clearances from when she was his assistant to fabricate vendor invoices. They routed the stolen funds through 3 different international accounts before letting the money rest in a domestic shell company. I stared at the ledgers. The sheer audacity of the theft was staggering. I traced my finger over the printed spreadsheets. They had set up a fake consulting firm under Lauren's maiden name, funneling the money in increments of just under $50,000 to avoid immediate federal banking flags. It was a classic structuring technique, and it was a massive federal crime all on its own. How could they possibly think they could steal $2 million from your company without you noticing? I asked, genuinely baffled by their reckless stupidity. A discrepancy of that size triggers immediate internal audits. Harrison took a slow sip of his scotch. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal glass. Because my wife has absolutely no idea who I really am, he said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, the predator energy radiating from him becoming palpable. To Lauren, I am a mid-level operations director at a regional logistics firm. She believes my annual salary is roughly $180,000. She constantly complains about my modest pension plan, my boring retirement accounts, and my complete lack of corporate ambition. She thinks she married a safe, predictable, aggressively average man who could never dream of providing the lavish lifestyle your arrogant husband promised her. Harrison smiled, a chilling, hollow expression. Lauren does not know that I am a venture capitalist. She does not know that the logistics firm she thinks I work for is just one minor asset among 47 companies in my private investment portfolio. I am a stealth billionaire, Olivia. My true net worth is entirely invisible to anyone without high-level federal clearance. My assets are locked behind impenetrable, multi-layered blind trusts established long before I ever met her. I do not own anything on paper. The trusts own everything. I process the data, the variables clicking seamlessly into place. So when they stole the $2 million, I reasoned aloud, they thought they were draining funds from a faceless corporate entity. Exactly, Harrison confirmed. They targeted a shell company they believed was facing a disorganized transition period. They did not realize that specific shell company is wholly owned by my primary trust. They did not steal from a disorganized corporation. They stole directly from me, and I watched them do it. I looked at him, truly understanding the man sitting across from me. He had not been blindsided. He had deliberately allowed the breach to happen. Ryan thought he was a mastermind for forging a mortgage document. He thought his charming sales director persona gave him the financial literacy to play the system. But Harrison was playing a different game entirely. Harrison was weaponizing the system. You let them commit federal wire fraud, I said, a rare feeling of profound professional respect settling over me. Divorce court is messy, emotional, and tedious, Harrison replied coldly. If I confronted Lauren about her infidelity, she would have dragged me through months of legal mediations, fighting for alimony and spousal support. I do not engage in emotional battles. I amputate my liabilities. I needed them to commit a crime, so massive, so irrefutable, that federal prison and total financial ruin would be their only remaining options. I gave them enough rope, and they enthusiastically tied their own nooses. And now you have the documentation to detonate their lives, I stated. I have the documentation, Harrison agreed. But to ensure they cannot escape through bankruptcy protection or favorable plea deals, I need to execute a very specific legal maneuver. I need to close the trap completely, and I cannot do it without you. I need you to listen very closely to the legal mechanics of this operation, Harrison said. He slid a crisp, newly printed document across the table. It was a single page dense with legal citations and financial terminology. White-collar criminals like Ryan and Lauren operate under a false sense of security, Harrison explained, leaning his broad shoulders forward. They believe that if they are caught, they can simply hire a decent defense attorney, claim ignorance, negotiate a plea deal, and declare. Chapter 11 Bankruptcy to wipe out the civil penalties. They think they can hide behind corporate liability laws to protect their personal assets. I intend to strip them of that luxury. To completely annihilate them legally and financially, we have to elevate their embezzlement from standard corporate theft to a coordinated federal conspiracy. I picked up the document. As a senior risk data analyst, I was intimately familiar with the federal codes listed on the page. You are targeting a non-dischargeable debt classification. I noted, my eyes scanning the text. You want to trigger a specific federal fraud clause so that even if they file for bankruptcy, the debt survives. They will owe the money until the day they die. Harrison gave a sharp, approving nod. Precisely. But a standalone corporate theft is too clean. Lauren could argue she was manipulated by her new lover. Ryan could argue it was a business loan gone wrong. To lock the trap, we must merge the crimes. We have to connect the $150,000 Ryan stole from your joint account directly to the $2 million they embezzled from my shell company. We have to prove a coordinated pattern of spousal extortion and wire fraud. I looked up from the document, meeting his cold, calculating gaze. And how do we merge two completely separate financial crimes committed by two different people against two different victims? Harrison did not blink. We merge the victims, he stated evenly. I am proposing a paper marriage, Olivia. A legally binding, meticulously drafted marital contract between you and me. The sheer audacity of the proposition settled over the quiet room. I sat perfectly still, processing the strategic brilliance of his plan. If we are legally married, Harrison continued, his voice adopting the clinical precision of a surgeon explaining a procedure, our individual assets and liabilities intersect under the umbrella of our marital estate. Your stolen $150,000 and my stolen $2 million are no longer isolated incidents. They become a targeted, coordinated attack on a single legal entity by two conspiring individuals. The moment we file our marriage certificate at the courthouse, Ryan and Lauren are no longer just petty thieves. They are co-conspirators in a multi-million-dollar federal racketeering scheme. My analytical mind raced, mapping out the legal pathways. It was a flawless, lethal maneuver. The federal prosecutors would not have to build two separate cases. They would have one massive, undeniable paper trail of interlinked wire fraud, identity theft, and spousal extortion. And because my father-in-law co-signed Ryan's fraudulent line of credit, I added, feeling a cold rush of adrenaline merging our legal standing, means Richard's collateral is now directly tied to a federal investigation. Harrison smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. Exactly. When the federal agents freeze Ryan's assets, they will instantly freeze Richard and Patricia's estate as well. The bank will foreclose on them within hours. The entire family will be bankrupted, publicly humiliated, and stripped of every asset they possess. They wanted to build a legacy. We are going to hand them a federal indictment. I leaned back against the leather booth. It was an extreme measure, a marriage of pure tactical vengeance. But I thought about the sheer cruelty I had endured just hours ago. I thought about Ryan standing in my kitchen mocking my career. I thought about Patricia demanding I consider my stolen savings a severance package for wasting her son's youth. They had discarded me like trash, assuming I was too weak and too boring to fight back. They had fundamentally miscalculated my tolerance for risk. What are the terms of this contract? I asked, my voice completely steady. Harrison pulled a sleek platinum pen from his jacket pocket and placed it next to the document. The marriage will be strictly a business arrangement. We sign a post-nuptial agreement immediately, protecting my pre-existing trusts and your independent assets. We stay married on paper just long enough for the federal indictments to drop and the asset forfeitures to be finalized. Once Ryan and Lauren are in federal custody and the in-laws are evicted from their foreclosed mansion, we file for an amicable annulment. He held my gaze, his dark eyes intense and absolute. In exchange for your cooperation, I will ensure you receive full financial restitution, not just the $150,000 Ryan stole. I will pay you a consulting fee of $1.5 million from my private trust the moment our annulment is finalized. 10 times what they took from you. You get your money back, you get your independence, and you get the absolute utter destruction of the family that tried to ruin you. I looked at the document on the table. $1.5 million. Financial freedom. The ultimate power to crush the people who thought I was nothing but a stepping stone for their golden boy. I did not need time to think. I did not need to consult my emotions. The data was perfectly clear. The return on investment was astronomical, and the risk was entirely shifted onto my enemies. I reached across the table and picked up the platinum pen. I am a risk analyst, Harrison, I said, looking him dead in the eye. And I calculate that Ryan and Lauren are about to experience a catastrophic market crash. I signed my name at the bottom of the proposal with quick, decisive strokes. I pushed the paper back across the table. Harrison reviewed the signature, a distinct look of dark satisfaction crossing his features. He extended his right hand across the polished wood. I reached out and grasped his hand. The handshake was firm, sealing a pact forged in betrayal and cold logic. "Tomorrow at noon," Harrison said. "Wear something sharp. We have a courthouse to visit and a trap to set." I left the obsidian with a singular burning focus. Harrison had arranged a secure suite for me at a luxury hotel downtown, complete with high-speed encrypted networks. The moment I locked the heavy wooden door behind me, I unpacked my primary workstation. As a senior risk data analyst, I build predictive models to detect institutional vulnerabilities and track anomalous financial behaviors. Ryan thought he was a criminal mastermind, but to me his digital footprint was as subtle as a neon sign in a dark room. I began compiling the federal fraud evidence file, sipping black coffee as the city lights flickered to life outside my window. I started with the $150,000 drained from our joint account. Using standard banking verification protocols, I traced the exact timestamp of the wire transfer. Ryan had initiated it from his office IP address, completely failing to use a basic proxy. Then I dug into the $500,000 line of credit Jamal had warned me about. Ryan had scanned and uploaded the purportedly signed mortgage documents to the lending portal. He forgot that modern digital scanners embed hidden metadata. I extracted the exchangeable image file data from his uploaded PDF. The documents were scanned on a machine registered to Lauren's apartment complex, and the digital signature timestamp completely conflicted with the physical notary stamp. His country club friend had cut corners backdating the notary seal and leaving a glaring prosecutable gap in the timeline. Next, I merged my findings with the black folder Harrison had provided. Lauren and Ryan had set up their fake consulting firm using a registered agent service in Delaware. They routed Harrison's $2 million through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands before bringing it back domestically to wash the funds. But Ryan, blinded by his own towering ego, had linked his personal mobile phone number to the two-factor authentication of the shell company's primary banking portal. It was a catastrophic operational failure. I mapped the entire network on my screen. Green lines for the domestic forgery. Red lines for the international wire fraud. The visualization of their crimes was absolute perfection. I had them boxed into a corner they could never negotiate their way out of. At exactly 8 o'clock the next evening, a sharp knock echoed through my suite. I opened the door to find Jamal standing in the hallway. He wore a dark wool overcoat, his eyes scanning the empty corridor before he stepped quickly inside. Harrison emerged from the adjacent sitting room, adjusting his tailored cuffs. The three of us stood in the center of the suite, forming the most unlikely and dangerous alliance imaginable. Jamal did not waste time with pleasantries. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of printed audit logs. As an independent auditor, I have access to the secondary verification servers for the regional bank Ryan used to secure the fraudulent line of credit. Jamal stated, his voice a low, steady baritone. I ran a shadow audit this morning under the guise of a routine compliance check. What I found is going to accelerate your timeline significantly. He spread the documents across the glass dining table. I leaned in, my eyes immediately catching the guarantor signatures on the secondary loan agreements. Ryan did not just forge your signature to leverage the house, Olivia Jamal explained, pointing to a highlighted row of data. The bank flagged his debt-to-income ratio because of the massive outbound wire transfers he was making to Lauren's shell accounts. To force the loan approval through, Ryan needed a guarantor with substantial liquid assets. Jamal tapped a specific signature line on the printed ledger. Your father-in-law co-signed the entire $500,000 line of credit. I stared at Richard's digital signature, processing the sheer magnitude of what Jamal had just revealed. Richard had not merely packed my boxes and insulted my career. He had legally anchored his own financial existence to his son's fraudulent schemes. He used the family estate as collateral. Harrison observed his tone dangerously calm as he analyzed the asset declaration forms. Richard pledged his primary residence to secure Ryan's debt. Jamal nodded, his dark eyes meeting mine. Patricia and Richard are fully leveraged. They remortgaged their own unencumbered property to guarantee Ryan's new life with Lauren. They think Ryan is a financial genius who just needed a temporary bridge loan. They have no idea he used that line of credit to supplement the $2 million he stole from Harrison. The room fell totally silent as the reality of the snare settled over us. I looked at the interconnected web of documents on the table. The trap was no longer just built for Ryan and his mistress. It had expanded, pulling my toxic in-laws directly into the blast radius. If we proceed with the federal indictments and trigger the default clauses on the stolen corporate funds, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet suite, Ryan's assets will be immediately frozen by the federal government. The bank will panic. They will instantly call in the guarantor's collateral to cover the fraudulent $500,000. Harrison finished my calculation with a cold smile. Which means Patricia and Richard will lose their estate. The bank will foreclose on them the exact same day Ryan is arrested by federal agents. They will be left absolutely destitute. Jamal stood tall, adjusting his overcoat. He had spent years watching Patricia and Richard coddle Ryan while treating everyone else like disposable staff. He had watched them eagerly pack my belongings and mock my pain. Will taking down Ryan destroy them completely? Jamal asked, his voice steady and resolute. Yes, I answered without hesitation. I looked at Harrison, then at Jamal. No one in this room was going to suggest leniency. Patricia had called my stolen life savings a severance package. Richard had laughed while stealing my home. They wanted a legacy built on my financial ruin. I was simply returning the favor. We show absolutely no mercy, I stated. Harrison smiled, a dark, brilliant flash of anticipation lighting up his features. We burn it all down to the foundation, he agreed. 2 days later, the time came to execute the first physical phase of our strategy. I walked into the sleek, glass-paneled conference room of Ryan's legal counsel. I had deliberately chosen my wardrobe for this specific performance. Instead of my usual sharp-tailored suits, I wore an oversized, wrinkled beige cardigan, minimal makeup, and flat shoes. I made sure my hair looked slightly unkempt, and I practiced keeping my shoulders slumped. I needed to project the image of a woman who had spent the last 48 hours sobbing on a hotel room floor. Ryan was already sitting at the massive mahogany table. He was flanked by his attorney, a slick, overconfident man named Davis. Ryan wore a brand new navy suit and a luxury watch that I knew he had purchased using my stolen savings. He was leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair, tapping a gold pen against the table, radiating the smug satisfaction of a conqueror. When I walked in, he did not even bother to stand up. He just smirked, drinking in my disheveled appearance like a fine wine. Have a seat, Olivia, Ryan said, gesturing vaguely toward the uncomfortable wooden chair opposite him. Let us make this quick. I have a lunch reservation with Lauren, and she hates waiting. I kept my eyes downcast, pulling the chair out slowly and sitting on the very edge of the seat. I let my hands tremble just a fraction of an inch as I placed them on my lap. I am ready, I whispered, ensuring my voice sounded fragile and hollow. Attorney Davis slid a thick stack of legal documents across the polished wood. This is the quitclaim deed and the global settlement waiver, Davis explained, tapping a manicured finger against the top page. By signing this, you are officially relinquishing all rights, title, and interest in the marital property. You are also acknowledging the new mortgage structure Ryan implemented, and you agree to walk away without contesting the equity transfer. It is a clean break. I stared at the pages, pretending to look overwhelmed by the legal jargon. In reality, my analytical mind was scanning the exact paragraph on page 14. Harrison had unleashed his elite team of corporate litigators the night before. They had intercepted the digital draft Davis had sent over for my review and injected a highly specialized, absolutely lethal poison pill into the indemnification section. They masked the insertion by slightly altering the formatting margins so the document appeared identical to the original draft. The clause was a masterpiece of financial warfare. Buried beneath a dense wall of standard liability waivers was a cross-collateralization indemnity provision. In plain English, it stated that by accepting sole ownership of the encumbered asset, Ryan unconditionally bound any and all future acquired assets, properties, and corporate entities to the entire balance of the forged debt. Furthermore, it explicitly waived his right to corporate veil protections or bankruptcy discharge in the event of default or federal fraud. Ryan thought he was just taking my house. He had no idea he was legally attaching his entire future and the stolen $2 million he held with Lauren to a toxic, fraudulent anchor. "Are you sure this is the only way?" I asked, forcing a slight crack into my voice. "I paid the down payment, Ryan. I have nowhere to go." Ryan rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed by my display of weakness. "We have been over this, Olivia. The house is leveraged. The money is gone. You can drag this out in court for 2 years and bankrupt yourself with legal fees, or you can sign the paper and walk away with whatever shred of dignity you have left. Be a rational risk analyst for once in your life. Cut your losses." He was so blinded by his own ego, so entirely convinced of his superior intellect, that he did not even bother to read the contract he was forcing upon me. He simply assumed that because I looked defeated, I had actually surrendered. He assumed his lawyer had drafted an impenetrable shield. He never considered that a predator might be hiding in his own paperwork. I let a single heavy sigh escape my lips. I picked up the pen provided by Davis. I held it awkwardly, making sure my hand shook visibly as I signed my name on the dotted line. I flipped to the next page and signed again. I repeated the process, executing every single trapdoor Harrison's lawyers had built. When I finished, I pushed the stack of documents back across the table. Davis quickly checked for my signatures, completely ignoring the text above them, and then slid the pile over to Ryan for his counter-signatures. Ryan grabbed his gold pen. He did not read a single sentence. He did not glance at page 14. He just rapidly scribbled his signature on every required line, his face glowing with arrogant triumph. With every stroke of his pen, he was legally locking himself into a federal racketeering conspiracy. He was sealing his own doom, and he was doing it with a massive, self-satisfied grin. "There," Ryan said, tossing the pen onto the table. "It is done. You are officially relieved of your domestic duties." Davis gathered the documents, stamping them with his notary seal. "I will have these filed with the county clerk by the end of the day," Davis confirmed. I stood up slowly, keeping my posture defeated. I gathered my cheap beige coat and my sensible scuffed shoes. I did not look at Ryan as I buttoned my coat. I just turned and began walking toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. Ryan could not resist one final twisting of the knife. He stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. "Hey, Olivia," Ryan called out. I stopped and turned my head slightly, my hand resting on the metal door handle. Ryan was leaning against the table, his arms crossed, looking at me like I was something scraped off the bottom of his shoe. "Have a nice life in a studio apartment," he sneered, his voice echoing loudly in the sterile room. "Try to find a hobby. Spreadsheets cannot keep you warm at night." I looked at him. I dropped the fragile broken woman act completely. My shoulders squared, my spine straightened, and the cold, absolute certainty of my profession returned to my eyes. I looked at the man who had stolen my savings, betrayed my trust, and insulted my intelligence. I did not scream. I did not throw a fit. I simply offered him a chilling, razor-sharp smile. "I will get exactly what I deserve," I replied, my voice steady and perfectly clear. I pushed the door open and walked out into the corridor, leaving Ryan alone with his forged documents and his imminent destruction. The decoy phase was complete. The poison pill was swallowed. The countdown to their total annihilation had officially begun. Within 48 hours of signing the fraudulent mortgage documents, Ryan executed his next disastrous financial maneuver. Sitting in my temporary corporate suite, I watched the digital alerts light up my secure dashboard. Ryan and Lauren had taken the $500,000 extracted from my house and combined it with the $2 million embezzled from Harrison. They immediately dumped the consolidated funds into a massive down payment on a sprawling $3 million estate in the most exclusive zip code of the city. It was a breathtaking display of financial illiteracy and unbridled arrogance. Ryan genuinely believed that converting stolen cash into a hard physical asset would somehow legitimize his sudden wealth. He thought buying a heavily mortgaged mansion would make him untouchable. He assumed the corporate veil of Lauren's fake consulting firm would protect them from any civil liability. In reality, he had just painted a massive federal bullseye on his own back. The real estate transaction perfectly linked the domestic forgery to the international wire fraud, solidifying the exact paper trail we needed for the grand larceny charges. As Ryan and Lauren settled into their stolen luxury, the rest of my former family initiated a vicious campaign of psychological warfare. They were not content to simply steal my life and my home. They needed to publicly parade my supposed defeat. My phone began lighting up with relentless notifications as Natalie and Patricia went to work on social media. They treated Lauren like absolute royalty, broadcasting her every move to our entire social network. Patricia posted endless public albums of the new mansion. She uploaded lengthy videos of the grand marble staircase, the heated infinity pool, and the massive vaulted ceilings. Her captions were dripping with toxic triumph. She wrote things like, "So blessed to finally have a daughter-in-law who knows how to build a real home and upgrading the family legacy one room at a time." Natalie was even more aggressive in her cruelty. She posted daily photos of Lauren draped in exorbitant designer maternity wear, holding her growing stomach while standing in the cavernous new kitchen. Natalie made sure to deliberately tag my personal accounts in every single post. She wanted to guarantee that I received a digital notification every time they celebrated my replacement. One post featured Ryan kissing Lauren on the cheek in front of a brand new imported sports car. Natalie captioned it, "My brother finally got the upgrade he deserves, leaving the dead weight behind." Even Richard, my former father-in-law, joined the spectacle. He posted a picture holding a crystal glass of expensive scotch on the new estate's balcony, boasting about his son's unmatched business acumen. They wanted me to break. They wanted me to respond with angry, bitter comments so they could screenshot my misery and pass it around their country club like a trophy. I gave them absolute silence. Every time a notification popped up on my screen, I simply took a screenshot, cataloged the evidence of their illicit spending, and added it directly to the federal fraud dossier. Their social media circus was nothing but a live broadcast of federal evidence. They were documenting their own possession of stolen assets in real time, eagerly providing the authorities with a detailed, itemized inventory of physical assets to seize. A week after the house purchase, I took a private elevator up to the top floor of the tallest residential tower in the financial district. Harrison owned the entire penthouse, a sleek minimalist fortress of glass and steel hovering high above the city skyline. It was the physical embodiment of actual untouchable wealth, a sharp, glaring contrast to the fraudulent house of cards Ryan had just purchased. I walked into the expansive living room, gripping my encrypted hard drive. Harrison was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the geometric grid of the city streets. He wore a crisp white dress shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, a glass of dark bourbon resting on the side table next to him. On the massive quartz dining table, our legal team had laid out the final paperwork for the federal authorities. The trap was fully constructed. Every bank statement, every forged signature, every routed wire transfer, and every piece of digital metadata had been printed, indexed, and cross-referenced. We were compiling the final exhibits for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and preparing the informational reports for the Internal Revenue Service. We had outlined every violation of the federal tax code and mapped the entire money laundering sequence. I set my laptop on the table and brought up the latest barrage of social media posts. Patricia had just uploaded a live video of Lauren giving a tour of the new nursery, boasting about an imported Italian crib that cost more than most people make in an entire year. I hit play, letting Patricia's shrill, bragging voice echo briefly in the quiet, sophisticated space of the penthouse. Harrison slowly turned away from the window. He walked over to the table and looked down at the screen, watching his wife play house with the man who had stolen his corporate funds. His face was a mask of cold, predatory calm. He did not show a single ounce of anger or betrayal. He simply analyzed the behavior of his targets, evaluating their tactical positioning with a detached clinical precision. They are spending the money significantly faster than we projected, I noted, scrolling through the feed to show the latest luxury purchases. Ryan just bought an exclusive yacht club membership. They are completely drunk on their own perceived brilliance. They feel invincible. I reached over and closed the laptop, cutting off Patricia's voice and plunging the room back into silence. The evidence packet is perfectly organized and ready for submission, I stated. Harrison picked up his glass of bourbon and took a slow, measured sip. He looked back out the large window, watching the tiny, oblivious cars move along the streets far below. He offered a dark, razor-sharp smile that held absolutely zero mercy. "Let them climb higher," Harrison said, his voice echoing with absolute unforgiving finality. "The fall will break more bones." The very next morning, we initiated the strike. There was no grand ceremony, no dramatic confrontation in a crowded room, and no screaming matches. Financial execution is a quiet, sterile process. We sat in the sleek conference room of Harrison's primary legal counsel, flanked by 3 former federal prosecutors, who now commanded exorbitant hourly rates to navigate the labyrinth of white-collar crime. I sat at the long mahogany table and handed over the encrypted flash drive containing the complete, unredacted federal fraud dossier. Every forged signature, every routed wire transfer, every piece of metadata tying Ryan and Lauren to the embezzled $2 million and my stolen $150,000 was locked within that small piece of metal. The lead attorney plugged it into a secure terminal. With a few deliberate keystrokes, the data was transmitted directly to a highly placed contact within the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically their white-collar crime division. Simultaneously, the file was flagged and routed to the Criminal Investigation Unit of the Internal Revenue Service. Federal investigations do not begin with blaring sirens and kicked-down doors. They begin with absolute silence. They begin with sealed subpoenas sent through encrypted channels to banking compliance officers. They begin with forensic accountants cross-referencing tax identification numbers with offshore routing codes. For a man like Ryan, who thrived on loud declarations, toxic posturing, and flashy displays of stolen wealth, this silent machinery was his ultimate blind spot. He was looking for a screaming ex-wife showing up at his door to beg for her house back. He was completely unequipped to look for a federal subpoena quietly landing on the desk of his mortgage lender. Over the next 2 weeks, the slow, invisible strangulation of Ryan's finances commenced. Through Jamal's discreet network of auditing contacts, we monitored the subtle, devastating ripples in the banking sector. The Internal Revenue Service placed a preliminary invisible lock on the shell company Lauren had registered in Delaware. Then the federal authorities requested a secondary compliance review of the $500,000 line of credit Ryan had secured using my forged signature. The moment the federal agents matched the digital metadata from my stolen funds to the international wire transfers used to buy their new mansion, the automated fraud triggers engaged. Behind closed doors, bank executives began quietly freezing the secondary accounts. Ryan remained completely, blissfully oblivious. He was too busy picking out imported Italian marble for his new foyer and bragging about his financial genius to notice that his primary checking account had suddenly stopped accepting external transfers. He assumed his newly acquired wealth made him a priority client, completely unaware that his accounts had been flagged with federal hold codes that not even a bank president could override. The tension in my temporary corporate suite became a physical living entity. Every morning, I woke up, drank my black coffee, and checked the encrypted dashboard Harrison had provided. I watched the net tightening around them. I saw a minor credit card decline at an expensive downtown restaurant, a charge Lauren likely brushed off as a simple terminal error. I noted a delayed wire transfer for a luxury landscaping service, which Ryan probably blamed on weekend banking hours. They were completely insulated by their own breathtaking arrogance, interpreting the first cracks in the ice as mere administrative hiccups. They had no idea they were already standing at the bottom of the ocean. Jamal called me late one Thursday evening from an untraceable burner phone. He confirmed that the compliance department at Richard's bank had just received a federal inquiry regarding the collateral used to secure Ryan's loan. Richard's own house, the sprawling estate Patricia paraded around in, was now officially tagged as a liability in an active federal investigation. Jamal described sitting across from Richard at a family dinner just hours earlier. Richard had been swirling a glass of expensive scotch, boasting to Jamal about how easily Ryan had navigated the real estate market. Jamal had nodded, smiled politely, and kept his mouth shut, knowing full well that Richard's signature on that fraudulent document was a ticking time bomb. The sheer discipline it took for Jamal to sit at that table and say nothing only deepened my profound respect for him. He was the perfect inside man. The waiting was a masterclass in psychological endurance. There were moments when I wanted to drive to their $3 million estate and look them in the eye. I wanted to see the panic register on Patricia's face. I wanted Richard to realize his entire legacy was evaporating into thin air. But as a senior risk data analyst, I know that premature celebration is the death of a perfect strategy. You do not interrupt the enemy when they are making a mistake, and you certainly do not warn them when the guillotine is about to drop. I channeled my energy into my work, maintaining my absolute professional composure at the office. I sat in boardrooms analyzing corporate risk profiles while privately orchestrating the most devastating risk realization of my life. Harrison and I communicated daily. Our conversations were brief, tactical, and entirely devoid of emotion. He reported that the federal agents were finalizing the asset forfeiture warrants. The moment those warrants were signed by a federal judge, the invisible hold on Ryan's accounts would become a highly visible, catastrophic reality. The quiet execution of this plan required a cold, clinical detachment. I spent my evenings in the penthouse with Harrison reviewing the timeline. We mapped out the exact sequence of the upcoming federal raids. The authorities wanted to ensure they captured the digital devices used to authorize the offshore transfers before Ryan or Lauren could attempt to wipe the hard drives. They needed them comfortable. They needed them feeling secure in their mansions surrounded by their stolen luxury. We stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking over the sprawling grid of the city. We are operating in the calm before the absolute storm. Harrison noted his voice an even steady hum against the glass. The subpoenas have been drafted. It is only a matter of days now. It is only a matter of days now, Harrison had said, and his timeline proved flawlessly accurate. The following Tuesday, I returned to my secure corporate suite after a grueling day of running risk projection models at the office. I dropped my briefcase on the console table and sifted through the small stack of mail the concierge had brought up. Among the standard utility notices and corporate newsletters, one item stood out like a glaring error on a clean spreadsheet. It was a thick, oversized envelope made of heavy cream cardstock. The return address in the upper left corner featured a custom, ostentatious gold monogram combining the initials of Ryan and Lauren. I stared at it for a long moment, my analytical mind automatically categorizing the sheer audacity required to track down my temporary corporate housing address just to send this piece of mail. I slid my finger under the wax seal and opened the envelope. Inside rested a meticulously designed gold-embossed invitation. It was heavy, expensive, and completely devoid of taste. The flowing calligraphy announced a combined engagement celebration and gender reveal party for Ryan and his new bride-to-be. The venue listed was the Oak Creek Country Club, the absolute most exclusive and wildly expensive venue in the entire metropolitan area. It was the exact club where Patricia spent her afternoons drinking mimosas and bragging about her family's manufactured wealth. As I pulled the invitation completely out of the envelope, a smaller piece of personalized stationery fluttered out and landed on the hardwood floor. I bent down and picked it up. It was a handwritten note penned in the familiar sharp looping handwriting of my former mother-in-law, Patricia. The ink was a dark, venomous blue. I read the single sentence written across the card. "Thought you would like to see what a real family looks like." I did not gasp. I did not feel the familiar sharp sting of rejection that used to paralyze me during my 6 years of marriage. Instead, a wave of profound cold clarity washed over me. Patricia could not help herself. Her need to inflict pain, her desperate craving to assert dominance over the woman she viewed as a discarded failure, had completely overridden any basic sense of caution. She wanted me to sit in a dark studio apartment, holding this gold-embossed card, weeping over the life I had supposedly lost. She wanted to twist the knife, ensuring I knew exactly how quickly I had been replaced and how lavishly they were celebrating that replacement. She wanted me to feel the full crushing weight of their triumph. I walked over to the kitchen island, placing the invitation and Patricia's cruel little note flat on the marble counter. I leaned over the paperwork, studying the date printed in elegant gold foil. A slow, chilling realization began to form in my mind. I quickly pulled out my encrypted phone and opened the shared federal timeline Harrison and I had built. I cross-referenced the date of the engagement party with the projected execution dates of the federal asset forfeiture warrants. The alignment was not just close, it was an absolute mathematical masterpiece. I immediately dialed Harrison's secure line. He answered on the first ring, the background noise of his penthouse silent and still. "I have received an interesting piece of mail," I stated, my voice buzzing with a low, controlled energy. Patricia tracked down my corporate suite. She sent me a formal invitation to Ryan and Lauren's engagement and gender reveal party at the Oak Creek Country Club. Harrison let out a short, sharp breath of amusement. "The arrogance is truly staggering," he replied. "They are throwing a massive high society gala funded entirely by embezzled corporate cash and fraudulent bank loans. What is the exact date of this performance?" I read the date aloud, my eyes fixed on the gold foil. I listened as Harrison processed the information on the other end of the line. The silence stretched for 3 seconds before I heard the distinct sound of him setting his crystal bourbon glass down on his desk. "Olivia," Harrison said, his voice dropping into a deadly, precise cadence. "That is the exact weekend the Federal Bureau of Investigation is scheduled to execute the seizure warrants. The white-collar division plans to freeze every single routed account by close of business that Friday." The perfection of this scenario settled over me. Ryan and Lauren were going to host the most expensive, highly publicized event of their lives, surrounded by the absolute elite of the city, at the exact moment their entire financial foundation disintegrated. They were going to stand in a ballroom draped in flowers and champagne, completely unaware that federal agents had already locked the doors to their bank accounts. "I need to confirm something," I told Harrison. "I am calling Jamal right now." I ended the call with Harrison and immediately dialed Jamal's secure number. My former brother-in-law answered quietly, clearly, stepping away from a family gathering to speak. "Jamal, I need you to check the audit logs for the Oak Creek Country Club," I requested. "I know Richard is a member, but a party of this magnitude requires a massive upfront deposit." I can hear Jamal typing rapidly on a keyboard. A few moments later, he let out a low whistle. "You are not going to believe this," Olivia, Jamal said softly. "Richard did not just put down a deposit. He sponsored the entire event using the secondary credit line attached to his own house. Patricia invited nearly 300 people. They are pulling out all the stops to officially introduce Lauren to high society. They are spending money like it is oxygen." "Thank you, Jamal," I replied. "Keep your head down. The storm is arriving exactly on schedule." I ended the call and looked back down at the heavy cream cardstock resting on my counter. Patricia wanted me to see what a real family looks like. She wanted me to witness the peak of their golden boy's success. She wanted me to sit in the shadows and watch them shine. It was the most fatal miscalculation of her entire life. She had just handed me a front-row ticket to their absolute destruction. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out my favorite black ink pen. I picked up the small, elegant RSVP card that had been tucked inside the envelope. My hand did not shake. My pulse remained perfectly steady. I checked the box to joyfully accept the invitation. I moved to the guest count section and boldly wrote the number 2. I was not going to hide in the shadows, and I certainly was not going to go alone. Under the meal preference section, I selected the most expensive filet mignon options available. Let Richard's fraudulent credit line absorb the absolute maximum cost. I placed the completed RSVP card back into the small pre-stamped return envelope. I sealed the flap with slow, deliberate pressure. I grabbed my coat and walked down to the lobby of my building, stepping out into the cool evening air. I walked to the blue postal collection box on the corner, opened the heavy metal slot, and dropped the envelope inside. Ryan thought he had discarded me. Patricia thought she had broken me. Lauren thought she had won the grand prize. They were about to discover the terrifying reality of what happens when a risk analyst finally stops running models and decides to execute the final scenario. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to show up to their beautiful, perfect party, and I was going to burn their entire legacy to the ground. Thursday morning arrived with a gray, overcast sky that perfectly matched the sterile nature of the task ahead. I stood in front of the massive concrete pillars of the downtown municipal courthouse, feeling the brisk wind off the harbor bite at my cheeks. There was no white dress today. There was no lace, no tulle, no nervous bridesmaids fussing over a bouquet of flowers. I wore a razor-sharp tailored charcoal pantsuit. It was a deliberate departure from the naive woman who had stood in a sunlit garden 6 years ago, pledging her life and loyalty to a man who would eventually steal it. Today I was not a bride. I was an architect of ruin. Harrison arrived precisely at 9 o'clock. He stepped out of his black SUV wearing a dark bespoke suit that signaled absolute corporate authority rather than romantic celebration. He walked up the courthouse steps with the measured predatory stride of a venture capitalist closing a hostile multi-million-dollar takeover. We did not exchange warm greetings. We did not offer each other nervous, hopeful smiles. We simply nodded, two apex predators acknowledging a mutual battlefield. We walked through the heavy double doors, bypassing the metal detectors with a quick flash of our identification. The courthouse corridors were bustling with young couples holding hands, exchanging giddy whispers and taking joyful photographs. We walked straight past them, our expressions entirely devoid of sentimentality. This was not a romance. It was a legally binding contract designed to annihilate our enemies with absolute prejudice. We approached the county clerk's office. The clerk, an older woman with tired eyes, handed us the thick stack of marital forms. We filled them out with clinical, silent precision. Harrison's elite legal team had already prepared an extensive, ironclad post-nuptial agreement, which we had executed in a private boardroom the night before. That particular document ensured my newly independent status was shielded, and his stealth billionaire empire remained completely untouchable by my previous marital debts. But the marriage certificate we were signing today served one singular, devastating purpose. It legally merged my stolen $150,000 with his embezzled $2 million. I picked up the heavy black pen provided by the clerk. As I pressed the ink to the official county document, my analytical mind visualized the legal trapdoor swinging wide open. By connecting our financial entities under the eyes of federal law, Ryan and Lauren were instantly transformed. They were no longer individual opportunists committing isolated acts of domestic theft and corporate embezzlement. My signature legally established a direct, undeniable link between the two crimes. They were now officially co-conspirators in a massive federal racketeering structure. I signed my full name, watching the ink dry on the page. That single stroke of a pen forged the final unbreakable chain. Ryan's fraudulent $500,000 line of credit, backed by my former father-in-law Richard's sprawling estate, was now inextricably bound to the active federal investigation surrounding Harrison's corporate funds. The trap was locked. There was absolutely no escaping through bankruptcy court. There were no corporate veil protections left for them to hide behind. They were entirely exposed to the full crushing weight of the United States Department of Justice. We were directed down a narrow hallway into a small fluorescent lit room where a municipal judge waited to officiate the brief procedure. The ceremony lasted exactly 4 minutes. Harrison and I stood side by side before the wooden podium, our postures rigid and fiercely professional. The judge looked between us, clearly confused by the sheer lack of warmth or affection. We did not hold hands. We simply stared straight ahead, focused entirely on the transaction. When the judge asked for our vows, we simply agreed to the standard legal terms mandated by the state. There were no rings exchanged. There was no dramatic music playing in the background, and there was absolutely no kissing the bride. The judge stamped the certificate with a loud, hollow thud, officially declaring us legally married. Harrison took the authenticated copies of the marriage certificate and slid them securely into his leather briefcase. We turned and walked right back out into the cold morning air. As we navigated the marble corridors heading for the exit, my encrypted phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a secure text message from Jamal, my former brother-in-law and our crucial inside man. The message was brief and highly technical. The bank compliance officers just triggered the secondary verification hold on Richard's collateral. The federal wire fraud flag is active in their internal system. The freeze will take effect globally within 48 hours. I showed the screen to Harrison as we pushed through the exit doors. He read the text without breaking his stride. His jaw tightened in a look of dark, profound satisfaction. Ryan was likely spending his morning tasting expensive catering menus or selecting premium floral arrangements for his lavish country club party. He was swiping stolen credit cards, completely oblivious to the fact that a federal net had just tightened permanently around his neck. The sheer hubris of his actions was about to collide with the uncompromising reality of federal law. We reached the bottom of the courthouse steps. The city traffic buzzed loudly around us, a symphony of horns and rushing engines. Harrison stopped walking. He buttoned his suit jacket and turned to face me. The brisk wind caught the edge of his coat, revealing the absolute calculating coldness in his dark eyes. He looked at me, a woman who had just legally tied her vengeance to his corporate empire, a woman who had refused to be a victim and instead chose to become a tactical weapon. "Ready to crash a party?" he asked, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. I looked back at him, my analytical mind perfectly aligned with the impending destruction. I thought of the empty bank account, the forged documents, and the cruel, arrogant smiles of the family that had tried to bury me. "I am ready to end it," I replied. Friday evening arrived with a crackling electric tension in the air. The 48 hours since our courthouse vows had been a blur of silent strategic maneuvering. Now, standing in the master suite of Harrison's penthouse, I prepared for the final phase of the operation. This was not just a social event. This was an execution, and an execution demands proper attire. For 6 years, I had dressed to appease the fragile egos of Ryan and his family. I wore conservative navy slacks, muted beige cardigans, and sensible flats. Patricia used to offer backhanded compliments, telling me my wardrobe was wonderfully practical for a woman who spent her life hiding behind a computer monitor. Ryan preferred me invisible, fading into the background, so his flashy sales director persona could command the spotlight. Tonight, I was shedding that invisibility completely. I was stripping away the discarded, boring wife narrative they had so eagerly constructed for me. Harrison had given me an unlimited line of credit drawn from one of his secure private trusts. He understood the tactical necessity of an overwhelming visual presence. If we were walking into the most exclusive country club in the city to publicly humiliate my in-laws and trigger a federal trap, I needed to look like a woman who possessed the power to do it. I stepped in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror and looked at my reflection. I wore a custom-tailored emerald green evening gown. It was a masterpiece of modern designer architecture featuring sharp, asymmetrical lines, a high neckline, and a daring, sweeping silhouette that radiated absolute power. The fabric caught the ambient light of the penthouse, shifting like liquid glass with every movement. Paired with sleek black stiletto heels and a diamond tennis bracelet from Harrison's private vault, the transformation was staggering. I did not look like a grieving ex-wife. I looked like a woman who could buy and sell Ryan's entire existence before finishing her morning coffee. My hair, usually tied back in a strict practical bun, fell in sleek dark waves across my shoulders. My makeup was flawless, sharp, and uncompromising. I stared into my own eyes, searching for any lingering trace of sadness or heartbreak. There was absolutely none. The woman who had cried in a hotel room over a stolen savings account was completely dead. In her place stood the architect of a spectacular ruin. I picked up a diamond drop earring and fastened it securely. My mind was operating with maximum analytical precision. I did not feel a single drop of pity for the people I was about to destroy. I reviewed the parameters of our financial model one final time. Ryan and Lauren thought they were untouchable in their newly purchased $3 million mansion. Patricia and Richard were currently holding court at the country club, drinking vintage champagne paid for by a fraudulent credit line. They were celebrating a legacy built entirely on stolen money and my forged signature. What they did not know was that the federal machine had already locked its jaws around their throats. Jamal had sent his final encrypted message an hour ago. The bank compliance officers had officially frozen Richard's collateral. The federal wire fraud flag was no longer pending. It was active and irreversible. The Internal Revenue Service had locked down Lauren's shell company. The trap was sprung, and all that remained was the theatrical reveal. I grabbed a sleek black clutch, dropping my phone inside. I was ready. Harrison emerged from his dressing room. He wore a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo that exuded aggressive, effortless wealth. He adjusted his cufflinks, his dark eyes sweeping over me with cold professional approval. The visual aesthetic is flawless. He noted, his voice a low, steady hum in the quiet penthouse. They are expecting a broken woman. We are going to hand them an apex predator. We took the private elevator down to the subterranean parking garage. A pristine, armored black SUV was idling near the exit. Harrison's private driver opened the door and we climbed into the spacious leather interior. As the vehicle pulled out onto the vibrant city streets, the magnitude of the moment settled over me. This was the exact scenario I had meticulously calculated. The drive toward the suburban perimeter felt incredibly fast. We left the towering steel and glass of the financial district behind, transitioning into the sprawling manicured landscapes of the ultra-wealthy neighborhoods. The Oak Creek Country Club sat nestled at the end of a long, winding private road lined with ancient oak trees and glowing gas lanterns. It was a fortress of elite society, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were struck on the golf course and reputations were guarded fiercely. As our black SUV turned onto the main drive, the sprawling clubhouse came into view. It was aggressively opulent. Valets in crisp uniforms were rushing frantically back and forth, opening doors for the city's highest society members. Expensive sports cars and luxury sedans formed a long line at the entrance. The building itself glowed with warm golden light spilling out from the massive ballroom windows. I could hear the faint, elegant hum of a live string quartet drifting through the crisp evening air. Patricia had spared absolutely no expense. She wanted this engagement and gender reveal party to serve as a glorious coronation for Lauren and Ryan. She wanted to cement their status among the elite, proving to all her wealthy friends that her son was a massive success. The irony was almost too sweet to bear. She had gathered the most influential people in the city to witness the greatest triumph of her family, effectively guaranteeing a massive captive audience for their absolute humiliation. The driver pulled our SUV smoothly up to the front entrance, bypassing a line of idling luxury cars with a quiet authority that instantly commanded attention. Two valets rushed forward, their eyes widening slightly at the intimidating presence of the armored vehicle. Harrison turned his head and looked at me. His expression was a mask of cold, predatory anticipation. "The federal agents are holding a perimeter 2 miles out," he stated quietly. "They will enter the premises on my signal." I nodded, adjusting the strap of my clutch. My pulse was a steady, rhythmic drumbeat. I looked at the glowing doors of the country club. Inside that room, Ryan was raising a glass of stolen champagne. Lauren was accepting compliments on her stolen wealth. Patricia was boasting about her stolen legacy. They had taken everything from me because they thought I lacked the capacity to strike back. The valet pulled open my door, the crisp night air rushing into the cabin. I stepped out of the vehicle, my stilettos clicking sharply against the cobblestone driveway. Harrison stepped out beside me, offering his arm. I looped my hand through his, feeling the solid, uncompromising strength of our partnership. The storm had arrived. We walked up the grand stone steps, toward the heavy oak doors, ready to bring the entire house of cards crashing down. We entered through the heavy wooden oak doors, leaving the cool night air behind. The grand ballroom of the Oak Creek Country Club was a masterclass in stolen extravagance. Cascading floral arrangements of white orchids and imported roses lined the gilded walls. A massive ice sculpture shaped like a swan dominated the center of the room, surrounded by an extravagant seafood buffet. Waiters circulated with trays of vintage champagne, unaware that their wages were funded by wire fraud. The air was thick with expensive perfume, the clinking of fine crystal glasses, and the low murmur of the city elite. I gripped Harrison's arm, feeling the muscle beneath his bespoke suit. We walked past the reception tables, bypassing the elaborate guest book where attendees were leaving their best wishes for the happy couple. As we approached the main archway leading into the heart of the ballroom, the energy of the room began to shift. It did not happen all at once. It started as a subtle ripple of awareness spreading outward from the entrance. A wealthy investor near the doorway stopped mid-sentence, his eyes widening as he took in Harrison's commanding presence. Then a cluster of country club socialites turned to stare at my emerald green designer gown. The quiet wave of shock moved quickly through the crowd, silencing conversations one by one. The live string quartet playing softly on a raised platform seemed to sense the abrupt change in the atmosphere. The cellist missed a note, the violinist faltered, and the elegant classical music dissolved into a discordant, awkward halt. The grand glittering ballroom fell completely and utterly silent. Every face in the room turned toward us. I scanned the sea of high society guests, my analytical mind locking onto my targets instantly. Ryan and Lauren were standing near the towering champagne pyramid at the center of the room. They had just been posing for a professional photographer, wearing the glowing expressions of two people who believed they had scammed their way to luxury. That glowing expression was instantly obliterated. Lauren spotted us first. I watched her eyes land on the man standing beside me. Her jaw practically physically dropped. For 6 years, she had viewed Harrison as a boring, aggressively average middle management employee. She had mocked his modest pension and left him because she thought he lacked ambition. Now she was staring at a man wearing a $10,000 tuxedo, radiating an aura of absolute terrifying power. Harrison certainly did not look like a discarded, pathetic husband. He looked like the owner of the entire country club. The color drained from Lauren's face, leaving her ghost white and visibly shaking. Her hands dropped to her sides, almost shattering the crystal glass she was holding. Her gold digger illusions were disintegrating right in front of her eyes. Ryan turned his head to see what had paralyzed his new bride. His gaze locked onto me, and the smug, victorious smirk he had worn in his lawyer's conference room vanished instantly. He expected me to be huddled in a cheap apartment, weeping over my lost savings and my broken marriage. Instead, I was standing in the center of his stolen kingdom, draped in diamonds and designer silk, holding the arm of a man who commanded the room with effortless authority. Ryan's arrogant face contorted in absolute raw confusion. His brain frantically tried to process the impossible data before him. He looked at me, then looked at Harrison, trying to calculate the connection. The gears in his head were spinning furiously, but he lacked the analytical capacity to understand the lethal trap he was standing in. The heavy silence was broken by the sharp, angry clatter of high heels striking the marble floor. Patricia was marching toward us. She wore a lavish sequined gown and an expression of pure, unadulterated fury. Her perfect evening was being hijacked, and her desperate need for control propelled her forward. Richard followed closely behind her, his face red with indignation. "Olivia?" Patricia hissed as she closed the distance, keeping her voice low but vibrating with venom. "What do you think you are doing here? You have a lot of nerve showing your face at my son's engagement party. You were explicitly told to pack your bags and disappear. You are not welcome in this family, and you are certainly not welcome in this club. I looked down at my former mother-in-law. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I RSVP'd to the invitation you mailed to my corporate suite. Patricia, I replied, my voice projecting clearly into the silent ballroom. I assumed you wanted me to see what a real family looks like. I am simply honoring your request. Patricia's eyes darted nervously around the room, acutely aware that the city elite were hanging on our every word. She gestured frantically toward a pair of large security guards stationed near the main entrance. I am going to have you thrown out, Patricia demanded, her voice rising in panic. Security, get over here right now. Remove this woman and whoever this man is from the premises immediately. They are trespassing. The two large security guards immediately began to move toward us. Ryan finally found his courage and stepped forward, standing next to his mother, trying to reclaim his alpha persona. You heard her, Olivia, Ryan said, trying to sound imposing. Leave now before this gets ugly. I did not move a single inch. Harrison remained perfectly still beside me, a towering monument of cold authority. I offered Patricia and Ryan a slow, razor-sharp smile. I reached into my sleek black clutch. My fingers found the cool, smooth edges of the documents we had prepared. I pulled out a heavy, matte black envelope, holding it up so the polished ballroom lights caught its surface. I would not do that, Patricia, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension with absolute lethal certainty. We actually brought you a small gift. I lowered the black envelope and stepped gracefully around Patricia, treating her like a minor, insignificant obstacle rather than a legitimate threat. The two large security guards hesitated, stepping forward to intercept me, but Harrison simply turned his head and locked eyes with them. A silent, terrifying warning radiated from his broad shoulders and cold stare. The guards stopped dead in their tracks, entirely unwilling to cross a man who commanded the room with such absolute, unquestionable authority. I walked straight past Ryan and Lauren, leaving them frozen in their tracks, and made my way toward the raised wooden platform where the string quartet had been playing just moments before. I climbed the 2 short steps, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me, and walked directly to the center stand. I reached out and grasped the microphone. I tapped the microphone twice with my index finger. A sharp, loud thud echoed through the massive ballroom, amplifying off the vaulted ceilings and gilded walls. The residual whispers in the room died instantly. The clinking of fine crystal champagne flutes ceased altogether. The wealthy investors, the country club socialites, and the city elite all turned their full, undivided attention to the stage. The grand ballroom fell dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the polished marble floor. I looked out over the sea of faces, perfectly calm, holding my ground under the bright spotlight. I found Patricia, Ryan, and Lauren standing near the melting ice sculpture, their faces pale and rigid with mounting, undeniable panic. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice projecting clearly and smoothly through the high-fidelity sound system. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Olivia. Until very recently, I was married to Ryan. I see many familiar faces in the crowd tonight. Many of you have been closely following Patricia's extensive social media updates over the past 2 weeks. You have seen the endless photographs of the magnificent new $3 million estate, Ryan and his new bride to be recently acquired. I know Patricia has been boasting tirelessly about her son's unmatched business acumen and his massive success in the luxury real estate market. She wanted everyone here to witness his triumph. I paused, letting the heavy, suffocating silence amplify my next words. I looked directly at Patricia, whose mouth was slightly open in pure horror, and then shifted my gaze to Ryan. I smiled, offering them a genuine ice-cold expression of ultimate victory. You have been bragging about this magnificent $3 million home to everyone in this city, I said, letting my voice ring out with crystal clarity. I just wanted to take a moment tonight to personally congratulate you as your landlord. The ballroom erupted into a chaotic symphony of sudden gasps and hushed, frantic whispers. The elite guests stared at each other in utter shock, their eyes darting rapidly between my confident posture on the stage and Ryan's horrified, sweating face. Ryan took an aggressive step forward, his hands shaking violently, his arrogant facade cracking entirely under the pressure. You are insane! Ryan shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. I have the deed. I bought that house through a private holding firm. You have absolutely nothing to do with it. Security, get her off the stage right now. Nobody moved to help him. I tapped the microphone again, demanding their silence, maintaining my supreme analytical composure. You bought that house through a blind shell company registered in Delaware. Ryan, I corrected him, using my sharpest, most precise professional tone. You thought you were hiding your newly acquired wealth behind an impenetrable corporate veil. You thought you were protecting the $500,000 you stole from my personal savings using forged loan documents alongside the $2 million you and Lauren brazenly embezzled from your former employer. But you failed to run a basic risk assessment. You failed to check the parent company of the firm that sold you the estate. I gestured gracefully toward Harrison, who stood near the front of the stage watching his wife Lauren completely crumble into a state of visible terror. That Delaware Shell Company is a subsidiary wholly owned by Harrison's primary blind trust, I revealed, watching the absolute devastation wash over their faces in real time. You did not buy a house, Ryan. In your desperate, arrogant rush to hide stolen funds and play pretend in high society, you wired $2.5 million directly back into Harrison's corporate accounts. You signed a fraudulent predatory lease agreement cleverly disguised as a property transfer. You do not own a single brick of that massive estate. Lauren let out a sharp, breathless sob, clutching her stomach as her legs visibly weakened beneath her. She looked at Harrison, finally realizing the true magnitude of the man she had betrayed. Patricia covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with catastrophic realization as her social standing evaporated before her very eyes. You walked right into a trap, I continued, my voice echoing mercilessly across the silent, captivated room. You are effectively squatting on property owned by my new husband, and your entire down payment is legally gone forever. You walked right into a fraudulent lease trap of your own making. You thought you could steal my financial security and flaunt it in front of the world. But numbers never lie, Ryan. The data always points to the truth. And the truth is, you are nothing but a common thief who just handed all his stolen money straight back to the people he wronged. The sheer magnitude of the revelation paralyzed the entire country club. Ryan stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound, looking exactly like a man who had just watched his entire empire turn to dust. I stepped back from the microphone, letting the absolute devastation of my words settle over the grand ballroom. The silence was heavy, thick with the electric current of public humiliation. Ryan stood completely immobilized. His expensive designer suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume on a broken man. I handed the microphone to Harrison. He took it, with a calm, deliberate motion, stepping forward to the edge of the stage. The warm, golden light of the grand chandeliers cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the predatory angle of his jaw. He did not look at the murmuring crowd. His dark, unforgiving eyes locked directly onto his terrified wife, Lauren. "Hello, Lauren," Harrison said, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the country club. "You have spent the last 6 months complaining to anyone who would listen about my lack of ambition. You told your friends I was just a mid-level manager at a boring logistics firm. You packed your bags and ran into the arms of a flashy sales director because you thought he could give you the lavish high-society lifestyle I supposedly could not afford. You wanted to be a billionaire's wife, Lauren. You just never realized you already were one." Lauren physically recoiled, taking a trembling step backward. Her hands shook violently as she clutched her designer maternity dress, the fabric suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating shroud. "I am not a mid-level manager," Harrison continued, his voice echoing flawlessly through the speakers. "I am the founder and primary stakeholder of an international venture capital firm. My personal net worth exceeds $700 million. The logistics firm you thought I worked for is simply a minor subsidiary in a portfolio of 47 global companies. I hid my wealth behind blind trusts because I wanted a wife who valued me, not my bank accounts. You proved yourself entirely incapable of that simple requirement. But your infidelity is not why we are standing here tonight. We are here because of your breathtaking financial stupidity." A collective gasp rippled through the elite crowd. The wealthy investors in the room suddenly recognized the magnitude of the man on stage. They physically shifted away from Patricia and Richard, desperately trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the disgraced family. Harrison turned his piercing gaze toward Ryan. "You thought you pulled off the perfect crime," Ryan Harrison stated, his tone shifting into clinical corporate precision. "You and Lauren used her old security clearances to access a dormant shell account. You fabricated vendor invoices and funneled $2 million through offshore routing numbers. You thought you were stealing untraceable liquid cash from a disorganized corporate entity. You were entirely wrong." Ryan swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead and dripping down his neck. He tried to speak, but his vocal cords completely failed him. The arrogant salesman was dead. "That account was not dormant," Harrison explained, gripping the microphone effortlessly. "It was an active, highly regulated corporate lending trust. In the eyes of federal banking laws, you did not just steal $2 million. You executed an unauthorized secured corporate loan. And because you deliberately used fraudulent credentials to initiate those wire transfers, you immediately violated federal banking statutes. But that alone was not enough for me. I needed to ensure you could never walk away from this debt. I needed to trap you permanently." Harrison looked over at me, a brief flash of profound professional respect passing between us before he focused back on Ryan. "That is where my brilliant wife came in," Harrison announced. "Olivia knew you were too arrogant to read the fine print of your own legal victories. When you forced her to sign over the rights to your marital home, my elite team of corporate litigators inserted a highly specialized poison pill into the indemnification section of your quitclaim deed. By accepting sole ownership of the house, you unconditionally bound any and all of your current and future assets to your existing liabilities. You legally tied the forged mortgage documents directly to the embezzled corporate funds. You merged the crimes, Ryan." Ryan's knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table to keep himself from collapsing onto the polished marble floor. Patricia let out a strangled, breathless cry, finally understanding the catastrophic magnitude of her son's arrogant mistakes. "By signing that contract," Harrison continued, his voice cold and unforgiving, "you triggered an immediate default on the $2 million corporate loan. The penalty clauses for fraudulent extraction and breach of contract are severe. They include an aggressive compounding penalty interest rate and immediate restitution demands. You explicitly waived your right to corporate veil protections. You explicitly waived your right to a bankruptcy discharge." Harrison paused, letting the absolute horror of the situation wash over his targets. He delivered the final crushing blow with the surgical precision of a true apex predator. "As of 4 o'clock this afternoon," Harrison stated, "the total outstanding balance on your fraudulent corporate loan, including the compounded penalty interest and federal default fines, exceeds $20 million. You are personally liable for every single cent. The debt is entirely non-dischargeable. You will owe me that money until the day you die, and the federal government is going to liquidate every single asset you possess to recover it." Lauren let out a sharp, agonizing wail. The illusion of her grand, wealthy future shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Her gold-digger dreams evaporated entirely. She stumbled backward, her high heels catching on the hem of her expensive silk gown. She collapsed heavily into a gilded dining chair, burying her face in her hands as loud, hysterical sobs tore through her chest. She had thrown away a $700 million husband for a man who was now $20 million in debt and facing federal prison. Ryan stood frozen, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at the massive ice sculpture, the cascading white orchids, and the hundreds of elite guests who were staring at him with absolute disgust. He had invited the entire city to witness his coronation, and instead he had provided them with front-row seats to his total financial and legal execution. The suffocating silence of the ballroom shattered when Richard lunged forward. My former father-in-law pushed his way past the frozen waiters and the towering champagne pyramid. His face was a violent shade of crimson, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff, heavily starched collar. He could not comprehend the reality of a predator larger than himself. He had spent his entire life bullying local contractors and intimidating small-town competitors. He thought his country club membership made him invincible, Listen to me, you arrogant piece of trash, Richard bellowed, pointing a thick finger directly at Harrison's chest. You think you can waltz into my club and threaten my son? I do not care how many shell companies you hide behind. I have the best corporate defense attorneys in this state on retainer. I will tie you up in civil litigation for the next decade. I will personally fund Ryan's defense, and when we are done countersuing you for defamation and emotional distress, I will make sure you are the one filing for bankruptcy. Richard puffed out his chest, looking around the room, as if expecting a round of applause from his fellow country club members. He expected the elite crowd to rally behind him to defend one of their own against this sudden intrusion. But the wealthy investors and socialites simply stared back at him with icy detachment. Wealth is inherently self-preserving. No one in that room was going to throw themselves in front of a $20 million federal fraud train to save a man who had clearly raised a criminal. Harrison did not even blink at the outburst. He simply looked at Richard with the clinical fascination of a scientist observing a deeply flawed experiment. He lowered the microphone and handed it back to me. This part of the execution was entirely mine. I gripped the microphone, feeling the smooth metal against my palm. I stepped forward, putting myself directly between my new billionaire husband and my former father-in-law. Richard glared at me, his eyes filled with the same toxic contempt he had always shown me during Sunday dinners. "You are going to hire the best lawyers in the city, Richard?" I asked, my voice projecting crisp and clear across the vast, silent ballroom. "You are going to personally fund a multi-million-dollar federal defense for Ryan. I will crush you both." Richard spat, completely missing the trap I was laying out for him. "You are just a bitter, discarded woman throwing a tantrum. You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with." I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the absolute zero-degree calculation of a risk analyst closing a ledger. "With what money?" Richard, I asked softly, though the high-fidelity sound system carried the fatal question to every single corner of the room. Richard scoffed, puffing out his chest again. "With my estate, with my investment portfolios, with the wealth I spent 40 years building while you were busy playing with spreadsheets. You co-signed Ryan's fraudulent $500,000 line of credit," I stated, my tone dropping into a sterile forensic cadence. "When Ryan forged my signature on the mortgage documents to extract the equity from my home, the bank flagged his debt-to-income ratio. He needed a guarantor with substantial, unencumbered liquid assets to force the approval through. He needed a wealthy fool. You gleefully signed those secondary loan agreements, Richard. You used your sprawling, immaculate estate as direct collateral to fund your son's new life with his mistress." Richard's aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second, but his towering ego refused to let him surrender, so what he barked defensively. "It was a bridge loan. My estate is worth millions. A temporary lien means absolutely nothing. It means everything when the primary borrower is indicted for federal wire fraud." I corrected him, stepping down from the stage so I was standing just a few feet away from his sweating face. I locked eyes with him, making sure he absorbed every single syllable of his impending doom. When Harrison's legal team triggered the default clauses on the embezzled $2 million this afternoon, the federal banking compliance algorithms immediately froze Ryan's assets. I explained, watching the color rapidly drain from Richard's cheeks. When a primary borrower defaults due to federal racketeering and grand larceny, the lending institution instantly seizes the guarantor's collateral to cover the toxic debt. They do not wait for a court order, Richard. The paperwork was fully automated. I pulled my encrypted phone from my clutch, tapping the screen to bring up the internal bank ledger Jamal had forwarded to me just hours ago. I held the bright screen up so Richard could clearly see the red, undeniable zero balance of his primary holding accounts. "The bank initiated the seizure protocols the exact moment you walked into this country club tonight," I announced, letting the crushing weight of the data settle over him completely. "Your investment portfolios are frozen, your checking accounts are locked, and as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the bank officially foreclosed on your estate. You do not have the money to hire a defense attorney, Richard. You do not even have the money to pay for the valet who parked your car tonight. You are entirely, completely bankrupt." The realization hit Richard with the force of a physical blow. His jaw went slack and he stumbled backward, clutching his chest as if he could not breathe. The arrogant patriarch of the family had been instantly reduced to a beggar in a tailored suit. A piercing, hysterical scream shattered the quiet elegance of the ballroom. Patricia clawed her way through the crowd, her sequined gown glittering as she lunged toward her husband. She grabbed Richard's lapels, shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying!" Patricia shrieked, her voice cracking with raw, unadulterated panic. "Tell me we still have the house, Richard. Tell me we did not lose the estate for this stupid boy." Richard could not speak. He just stared blankly at the floor, his breathing shallow and rapid. Patricia released him and let out a sound of pure agony. The woman who had spent decades meticulously crafting an image of generational wealth, the woman who had mocked my practical clothes and demanded I treat my stolen savings as a severance package, completely collapsed. She sank to the marble floor of the country club, sobbing uncontrollably, her perfect hair and makeup ruined by the sudden violent erasure of her entire social identity. A few feet away, Natalie began to weep loudly. She clutched her expensive designer handbag, realizing that her inheritance, her trust fund, and her privileged lifestyle had just evaporated into the night sky. The wealthy guests who had once eagerly accepted Patricia's invitations now looked at her with blatant, unfiltered disgust. They whispered behind their hands, shaking their heads at the sheer scale of the family's disgrace. Nobody reached out to help them. The perfect, arrogant family was crumbling publicly in front of their elite peers. They were being stripped of every ounce of dignity, wealth, and power they had ever claimed to possess. I stood beside Harrison, watching the wreckage of their lives spread across the ballroom floor. They had tried to bury me in the dark, but I had dragged them into the light and burned their empire down to the foundation. The crowd of wealthy socialites and venture capitalists remained absolutely frozen, captivated by the sheer magnitude of the destruction. No one dared to speak or intervene. They simply watched as Patricia sobbed on the marble floor and Richard stared into the void of his own financial ruin. It was in this heavy, suffocating silence that a new variable entered the equation. From the periphery of the paralyzed crowd, a single figure detached himself from the murmuring elite. Jamal stepped forward, his posture radiating the quiet, formidable confidence of a man who had spent his entire career dismantling financial lies. He walked past his weeping wife Natalie, who reached out a trembling hand toward him. Jamal did not even glance in her direction. He bypassed Richard and Patricia, moving with absolute purpose until he reached the stage. He took his place directly beside Harrison and me, completing our tactical triad. The shock on Ryan's face mutated into a fresh wave of horror. He looked at his brother-in-law, the man he had frequently dismissed at family dinners, suddenly realizing the fatal flaw in his domestic strategy. Jamal reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit. With a swift, practiced motion, he pulled out his official auditor's badge and a thick, heavy manila file. He did not hand it over gently. He tossed the file onto the nearest cocktail table. The thick stack of financial logs hit the glass surface with a sharp, resounding smack that echoed through the ballroom. "I warned you, Ryan," Jamal said, his deep baritone cutting through the tension with lethal precision. "Never cross an auditor." Ryan stumbled back another step, his hands raised defensively as if trying to ward off the physical manifestation of his crimes. "You," Ryan stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of his mounting panic. "You gave them the bank logs. You set us up." "I did not set you up," Jamal replied smoothly, adjusting his jacket. "I simply executed a routine compliance check on a highly suspicious ledger. You forged your wife's signature to extract $500,000, routed it through unverified offshore accounts, and tied it to a corporate embezzlement scheme. You left a digital trail so wide and reckless that a first-year accounting intern could have flagged it. I just made sure the data reached the appropriate federal authorities before you could attempt to destroy the evidence. You built a house of cards, Ryan. I just handed over the blueprints to the people bringing the wrecking ball." Natalie let out a shrill, betrayed gasp from her spot near the ice sculpture. "Jamal, how could you do this to your own family?" she cried, gesturing wildly to her parents on the floor. Jamal finally looked at his wife. his expression entirely devoid of sympathy. "This is not a family, Natalie," he stated coldly. "This is a criminal syndicate operating under the guise of suburban entitlement. I warned you all for years to stop treating Olivia like a disposable asset. You chose to protect a thief. I chose to protect the truth. My professional ethics are not subject to marital negotiation." Before Natalie could launch into another hysterical protest, a new piercing sound sliced through the ambient noise of the country club. It started as a faint wail in the distance, rapidly amplifying into a deafening mechanical scream. Flashing lights suddenly illuminated the towering ballroom windows. Brilliant, violent streaks of red and blue swept across the manicured lawns, cutting through the darkness and reflecting blindingly off the gilded mirrors and crystal chandeliers inside. The rhythmic, rotating glare washed over Ryan and Lauren, painting their terrified faces in alternating flashes of crimson and cobalt. The sirens wailed, with an aggressive, inescapable urgency, signaling the absolute end of their lavish delusion. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom burst open. The opulent reception area was instantly flooded with law enforcement personnel. A highly coordinated team of federal agents strode into the room, moving with the rapid, synchronized efficiency of a tactical strike force. They wore dark, heavy windbreakers, with the bright gold letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed boldly across their backs. Local police officers trailed behind them, securing the exits and locking down the perimeter to ensure no one could slip away in the chaos. The sea of wealthy guests parted immediately, falling back to create a wide, clear path for the advancing agents. No one wanted to be standing anywhere near the blast radius. The lead federal agent, a tall woman with a severe expression and a badge clipped to her belt, walked directly toward the center of the room. She did not hesitate. Her eyes were locked onto her targets with unwavering professional focus. Two other agents flanked her, their hands resting casually near their utility belts. Ryan Blackwood and Lauren Blackwood, the lead agent, announced, her voice a sharp, commanding bark that left absolutely zero room for negotiation. Ryan threw his hands up in the air, frantically shaking his head. "This is a massive misunderstanding," Ryan pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I have a corporate attorney. I can explain the transfers. It was a bridge loan. We have the paperwork right here." Lauren let out a terrified shriek and tried to back away, completely forgetting the heavy silk train of her designer maternity gown. She tangled her high heels in the expensive fabric and fell hard against the edge of a catering table, sending a tray of crystal champagne flutes crashing to the floor in a chaotic spray of glass and expensive liquor. The agents did not slow down. They closed the distance instantly. One agent grabbed Ryan by the shoulder, spinning him around and forcing his hands behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of handcuffs snapping shut echoed through the silent ballroom. Another agent moved to assist Lauren to her feet, immediately securing her wrists in the same cold, unforgiving steel. "Ryan Blackwood and Lauren Blackwood, you are under arrest," the lead agent stated, pulling a folded warrant from her jacket pocket. "You are being charged with multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." As the agent continued reading the Miranda rights with a sterile mechanical rhythm, Ryan began to sob. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy was weeping openly in front of the entire city elite, his knees sagging as the agents held him upright. Lauren wailed, thrashing wildly against her restraint, screaming that she was a victim, that Ryan had tricked her into taking the money. There was no loyalty left between the thieves. The moment the federal trap closed, they instantly turned on each other, desperately trying to survive a completely unsurvivable legal scenario. I stood silently next to Harrison and Jamal, my posture straight and my expression perfectly composed. As a risk analyst, I deal in absolute outcomes. Tonight, the data was flawless. The liabilities were entirely neutralized. The execution was absolute perfection. The federal agents shifted their grip, forcing Ryan and Lauren to walk forward. The heavy, humiliating reality of the perp walk had officially begun. They were paraded right through the center of the extravagant floral arches they had paid for with stolen money. As the lead agent shoved Ryan toward the grand foyer, his frantic, tear-streaked face locked onto me. He dug his expensive dress shoes into the polished marble floor, resisting the agent's forward momentum, just long enough to turn his body toward where I stood. "Olivia, please!" Ryan begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whimper that echoed across the silent ballroom. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them it was just a marital dispute over the house. We were married for 6 years, Olivia. I am sorry. I am so sorry. I will give the house back. I will give you everything. Just tell them to stop." He was crying openly now, the tears streaming down his face and ruining the collar of his custom-tailored suit. He honestly thought his apologies still held currency. He believed that the woman who used to pack his lunches and balance his checkbook would suddenly crumble at the sight of his tears and rush to save him. He was still trying to manipulate the variables, completely failing to realize that the equation had already been finalized. I stepped forward, leaving Harrison and Jamal slightly behind me. I closed the distance until I was standing just a few feet away from my handcuffed husband. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of the searing anger that had fueled my strategy for the past month. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression entirely void of mercy. I calculated the risk, Ryan, I stated, my voice ringing out with absolute chilling clarity. "The math says you are going to prison." Ryan's face went completely slack. The final spark of arrogant hope extinguished instantly in his eyes. He finally understood that he had not just been outsmarted, he had been clinically and legally obliterated. The lead agent gave him a hard shove, breaking our eye contact and forcing him to keep walking. Lauren was dragged out right behind him. She was no longer crying. She was screaming vicious, unfiltered obscenities at Ryan, cursing the day she ever met him, blaming his towering ego for ruining her life. The heavy oak doors of the country club swung wide open, and the flashing red and blue lights of the federal cruisers swallowed them both. The doors slammed shut, cutting off Lauren's shrieks and leaving a profound, ringing silence in their wake. I turned slowly, pivoting on my stiletto heels to survey the collateral damage left behind in the grand ballroom. The physical extraction of the criminals was complete, but the social execution was just beginning. Patricia was still collapsed on the floor, her sequined gown pulled around her like a deflated parachute. She reached a trembling, manicured hand toward a group of women she had played tennis with just yesterday. Susan Patricia sobbed, looking up at a wealthy socialite draped in diamonds. "Please, you have to help us call the club president. We need to secure a defense attorney for Ryan. They are making a terrible mistake." The socialite looked down at Patricia. Her face was a mask of sheer, unfiltered disgust. Susan did not offer her hand. She did not offer a single comforting word. She physically took a large step backward, pulling her silk wrap tightly around her shoulders to ensure it did not accidentally brush against Patricia's reaching fingers. "I think we are leaving now," Susan announced loudly to her husband, completely ignoring Patricia's desperate plea. "I absolutely refuse to be associated with federal inmates and bank fraudsters. It is entirely repulsive." That single cold dismissal triggered an immediate chain reaction. The elite guests, the very people Patricia had desperately tried to impress her entire life, began turning their backs. The murmurs of shock morphed into audible scoffs of disdain. They whispered loudly about the stolen money, the forged documents, and the absolute humiliation of the family. One by one, the venture capitalists, the corporate executives, and the country club board members turned around and began walking toward the coat check. Richard was kneeling next to his wife, his face buried in his hands. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of generational wealth and superiority. Now he was watching his elite peers step over him as they rushed to exit the contaminated room. No one offered to help them up. No one offered a supportive shoulder. The high society they worshipped was actively erasing them from their ranks. Their social capital was entirely bankrupt, perfectly mirroring the zero balance in their seized bank accounts. Natalie stood frozen near the melted swan ice sculpture, tears ruining her expensive makeup. She looked at Jamal, who was still standing tall and composed near the stage. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg her husband for a lifeline to pull her out of the wreckage. "Do not even try, Natalie," Jamal said, his voice carrying the firm, undeniable tone of a finalized audit. "I am filing the divorce papers tomorrow morning. You can reach me exclusively through my legal counsel." Jamal gave me a single, highly respectful nod. It was the silent acknowledgement of two professionals who had successfully executed a flawless hostile takeover. He turned on his heel and walked out through the side exit, severing his ties to their toxicity forever. I turned back to Harrison. The stealth billionaire stood quietly, his hands resting in the pockets of his tuxedo. We did not gloat. We did not celebrate with high fives or dramatic emotional speeches. We had executed a complex federal maneuver, achieved maximum restitution, and neutralized all liabilities. It was simply a highly successful merger and acquisition. Harrison extended his arm. I looped my hand through his, feeling the solid, grounding reality of our partnership. We turned our backs on Patricia's wailing and Richard's silent despair. We walked down the center of the grand ballroom, our footsteps perfectly synchronized. The remaining guests parted for us, clearing a wide path out of sheer respect and fear. We pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. The flashing lights of the federal vehicles were already fading in the distance. Harrison's armored black SUV pulled up smoothly to the curb. The valet rushed to open the door, keeping his head bowed in deep reverence. I stepped into the vehicle, settling into the plush leather seat. I did not look back at the glowing windows of the country club. I left the toxic family exactly where they belonged, utterly and absolutely in ruins. 6 months later, the dust had completely settled. The federal justice system moves with devastating efficiency when presented with an ironclad, perfectly documented case. Ryan is currently serving an 8-year sentence in a federal correctional institution, though I highly doubt his arrogant sales director persona is winning him any friends in the cafeteria. Lauren avoided jail time by taking a plea deal and turning state's evidence against him. She is currently working a minimum wage retail job, her gold digger ambitions permanently extinguished by the crushing reality of federal probation and a felony record. As for Patricia and Richard, their descent was absolute. The bank seized their sprawling estate, liquidating every antique vase and luxury vehicle to cover the fraudulent collateral. They filed for bankruptcy, but because the debt was tied to a federal fraud conviction, the remaining penalties survived the discharge. They now live in a cramped 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of the city. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Patricia refuses to leave the house, entirely incapable of facing the local grocery store cashiers who used to serve her at the country club. They built their entire identity on an illusion of superiority, and without their wealth, they are simply empty, miserable people. My arrangement with Harrison concluded just as cleanly as it began. We stood in the same municipal courthouse, signing the annulment papers with the exact same clinical precision we used to secure our marriage certificate. We shook hands, dissolving our legal union, but cementing a lifelong professional alliance. That afternoon, my banking dashboard pinged with an incoming wire transfer from his primary trust. He sent $5 million, classifying it strictly as a corporate consulting fee for my role in identifying and eliminating internal liabilities. I did not use the money to buy an extravagant mansion or a fleet of sports cars. I used it to build an empire. I leased a sleek, high-floor office space in the financial district and launched my own elite risk management consulting firm. We specialize in corporate asset protection and hostile takeover mitigation. My very first executive hire was Jamal. He walked away from his toxic marriage with Natalie and joined me as my chief financial officer. Together we run the sharpest, most ruthless analytical team in the city. I am no longer just a woman analyzing spreadsheets in the shadows. I am completely independent, incredibly wealthy, and holding total power over my own future. The most expensive lesson a trader can learn is that you never show your cards until the game is over. Have you ever smiled while watching your enemies walk blindly into their own destruction? Tell me your story in the comments below. If this journey of reclaiming power resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of ultimate justice. Thank you for watching, and remember to never underestimate the quiet ones.